This afternoon, my sister and I are going to have a few words. We've got a couple other esteemed members of our community coming up to speak, and grandchildren, and then my brother Gord's going to finish things off. So how do we start to honor a life of our amazing father? Dad was born in 1933 and raised in Northern Ontario in the village of Pamour Mines outside of South Porcupine. It was an idyllic time for him. Charlie's not very happy. Growing up with his parents and his older brothers Bill and Gord, with hockey and friends. The time in Pamour led to friendship that lasted a lifetime. The stories that Margot and Gord and I were raised on were based on the characters of the North, and they were characters, I'll tell you. We heard about the Golden City Public School and South Porcupine High School and all the nicknames of all the friends in those early years. Those friends from school and the hockey days remained close for the rest of his life. Mom went with Dad to all kinds of reunions. High school, hockey teams, the anniversary of when the arena was built, the anniversary of when the arena was burned down. They were all about reconnecting with his childhood friends. We often talked about the parades they had at these reunions. And I said to him, "Who was on the sidewalk watching these parades?" And he goes, "No one. We were all in the parade." And he looked at me like, "That's the dumbest question I've ever heard in my life." He was fiercely proud of his Northern Ontario roots, as I'm sure he told all of you, whether you wanted to hear it or not, filling our lives with events of his childhood. I remember a time when Dad and John Frudeman were organizing the Beaver Fest slow pitch tournament on July 1st weekend. And there was an upset parent who launched a profanity-laced tirade at my dad about the tournament, finishing by calling him a Northern Ontario a-hole. Dad looked at Fruit and said, "Doesn't he know that's a compliment?" He just loved his small-town heritage, and it shaped the man who had become. Dad left the North to attend Upper Canada College in grade 13 and off to medical school at the University of Toronto. While in medical school, he was set up on a blind date where he met Joan McMillan, a nursing student at Toronto General. The blind date was on Dad's 21st birthday, and this is legendary in our family. Mom's nursing friend, Wendy McKenzie, who went to school in South Porcupine with Dad, had set her up with her boyfriend's classmate. It was his 21st birthday, the drinking age at the time, and Dad ended up wrapped around the toilet by the end of the evening. Mom was sure to let her friend know not to set her up with any of her Northern Ontario friends again. After many apologies, Mom agreed to a second date, thank goodness for all of us in this room. Mom and Dad were married in 1958, and Dad finished his internship. Margot arrived in 1959. After graduation, Dad was keen to get out of the city and go back up north. East York-raised Mom assured him he would be very lonely in South Porcupine. Luckily for all of us, Dad was asked to join Dr. Donald McKay and Dr. Robert Story and their family practice on 27 3rd Street, who many of you will remember. And now I'll turn it over to Margot, who was actually alive at that time, to give her thoughts.
Yeah, Doug wanted the mic to himself, but I told him he couldn't have it. To set the scene, Dad was only 27 when he and Mom moved to Collingwood with me. They were so fortunate to find themselves a little pink rental bungalow on Oak Street. The street was filled with other young couples, and Mom and Dad were able to form lifelong friendships. The group of them, particularly the Willises, became co-conspirators in various adventures, one involving a thwarted attempt to put an antenna on top of a house. The fun continued when, at 4 years old, I moved with my parents and my new brother Gord to Maple Street. The house was interesting when we first saw it. There was a huge hole in the backyard. I have no idea why. But Mom and Dad settled in quickly, met everyone in the street, and new friendships were born. And Doug arrived. When I was 7, I remember somebody coming over and taking down the side fence. I asked Mom what was going on. She didn't tell me before this because, keep in mind, I was 7, and found out that we were getting a pool. Under some pressure to get a cottage, Dad had met with the builders of the Centennial Pool and arranged for them to build one for him. From then on, our summers centered around neighborhood gatherings around the pool, loads of parties, and our parents being surrounded by friends. Dad loved that pool, and you could find him in it every summer since. My parents worked hard to give us a very special childhood. We took trips every year, and Dad was the cruise director. Now, you have to be a certain age to understand that reference. For example, he was a camper extraordinaire and took us all over Canada. He added extra flavor to the road trips parts of the trips by making up stories about the various points of interest along the route. I don't think the stories had anything to do with what we were seeing, but it was an interesting educational experience. Now I'm going to move back to Doug for a sec.
Dad remained in general practice on 3rd Street until returning to U of T to complete his residency in radiology from 71 to 75. At this time, he began working full-time at the G&M. He loved the work and the people, enjoyed his time in the doctor's room, as some doctors around here can attest, and being involved with Foundation. Sports were a huge part of Dad's life. He was a member, he would be upset if I didn't mention this. He was a member of the All-Ontario Juvenile Championship hockey team in 1950 with his buddies and a few future NHLers. When he arrived in Collingwood, his activities centered around the golf course, hockey, and Christie's slow pitch heaven, as Mikey Fawcett mentioned to me earlier, in the early days, and curling in his later years. Gord and I had one particularly thrilling afternoon watching them compete in the Flight Z, I think it was, Ontario Stick Curling Championship. One of his true sports loves was skiing. Mom and Dad joined Alpine Ski Club in 1969. Our family enjoyed many days together on the ski hill. He was reminiscing after he took ill a few weeks ago that one thing he would love to do is go skiing again. Shockingly to all of us, his chosen sports were all very social. He loved to kibitz with the guys on the playing field and loved the after-activity beer that accompanied various levels of BS and the glory of the day. Mom and Dad loved to travel, trips to Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Olympics in Lillehammer, and a wonderful trip to South Africa with the Jacksons and the Hickeys, and regular places to Mom's favorite place, Newfoundland, enriched their lives. Since we were children, Mom and Dad went to Bermuda every year, always on Gord's birthday, much to Gord's delight. They eventually purchased a timeshare and went every November. Highlights of the trips include each of the grandchildren along when they were 12. I had the opportunity to see Alex and Mitch skate in the Sochi Olympics, which was the highlight of both of our lives. I had to promise Mom that I would get them home safely and I would carry the bags. Mom was a little worried about us going. Although we stayed in the most disgusting, most expensive hotel anyone has ever seen. Can you still smell that place? Lizzie and Katie? Yeah. It was such a thrill to experience the Olympics with Dad, to see his granddaughter compete at the highest level. Dad was a keen sports fan. After meeting Joe DiMaggio at the Royal York, which I'm sure you've all heard about too, because he told everybody, he became a Yankees fan for life. He always loved the Packers as well, especially when he became a shareholder, and cheered enthusiastically against the Leafs. As mentioned in his obit, when Mom and Dad came to Collingwood, he did what any good Northern Ontario guy would do to meet people. He went to the rink. He was very involved in the early years with the shipbuilders and relished his time at the rail. When Gord and I went to a Blues game with him a couple months ago, I realized the strategic location of his chosen space in the rink. Everyone who had to walk along the north side of the rink had to walk past him. When we were there, it was a constant chatter of "Hi Doc, hi Doc, hi Doc," accompanied with hugs and handshakes.
My parents were together for 64 years. During that time, they epitomized a strong partnership and a lasting love. When asked by a nosy teenage daughter what she saw in Dad, Mom said, among other wonderful qualities, she loved his irreverence, his sense of fun. He was a perpetual teenager, as you all know. His steadiness and his love for his children, family, and friends. Over the years, they traveled widely, worked hard, and raised 3 children. I remember lots of laughter during our childhood, but also the serenity later in life when they would sit together, Mom reading, Dad watching solid sport. You have to, I don't want to explain that. And just enjoying being with each other. My greatest hope is that they're together now, continuing their journey.
The time after Mom's passing was very tough on Dad. The loneliness and isolation of the pandemic, The crushing loss of our Alex, and life without Mom on Maple Street were some of the most challenging times of his life, but there were great times as well. The additions of grandsons-in-law, Mitch and Rob, Kyle had arrived the year before, and the delight of great-grandchildren, Max, Rosie, Charlie, and Henry, brought new joy to our family. During this time, Dad's friends were simply amazing. These years brought dinners out, coffee time with the boys, and Scotch get-togethers to discuss the issues of the day. Dad relished coffee with the guys, Tuesday dinner with the Malloys, and this time with friends and family. This time also brought Lindy Milhausen into Dad's life. Sunday morning coffee, dinner at Lindy's, Friday nights at the Blues, trips to Bermuda, and a final trip to the north where Dad showed Lindy all of the places that meant so much to him. Margot Gordon and I joked with Dad that he would need a new girlfriend after he dragged Lindy all over the north, showing her arenas and houses and all the stories he loved to tell. Of course, Lindy loved it. Lindy, thank you from all of us. Sometimes I bug my doctor friends about missing the 1-hour optional lecture on empathy in medical school. I can tell you someone who never did and could teach a full year class on the subject. Dr. Amar Singh was simply amazing in his care of Dad, especially during his last days. Dad appreciated Amar immensely, although he would never tell him that. Amar's support to Dad and to all of us will never be forgotten. We thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you for that. I'd now like to ask Doug Hawkins to come up and say a few words about Dad.
I met Doc when I joined Rotary 27 years ago. He had already been a member of the club for 20 years, was past president, and he was the go-to guy. He liked people, and people liked him. A true measure of a person is how others feel about he or she, him or her, whatever it is. An example, we have an annual fundraiser at Rotary, trip of the month. Each Rotarian had a quota of 10 $100 tickets to sell. Now that'd be around $200 now, so it wasn't an easy task. We each scrambled to make the fundraiser a success and sell our 10. Not Doc. He grabbed 40 or 45 tickets, took them to the hospital, dropped them on fellow workers' desks, and then went back a couple of weeks later and collected the money. They love him over there. Just try to get to your table in a restaurant with him when he is spotted by a table of nurses. Setting up fundraising appointments was a breeze when you told the potential donor that Don Paul was part of the team and would be along with you. It worked the other way too. He told anyone new to Collingwood who asked how the Toronto crowd migrating to town were viewed by the locals that Collingwood was a great town. Made even better with you people coming up. He made fast friends with us as with everyone. He had the ability of listening to you, really listening to you, without even considering interrupting. He cared. On a personal note, we curled a couple of times a week at the Collingwood Curling Club, went to the International Bonspiel in Quebec City a couple of times, skied blue and snowmass in Colorado, golfed at fundraisers for the hospital, worked on town committees and more, drank coffee and sipped Macallan 12. All looked forward to and were a blast. Doc was a hockey guy. He played right wing for his beloved South Porcupine in league play with a group of guys he stayed in close contact with over the decades. Once here, he served as the Collingwood shipbuilder team doctor and as a president. Kibitzing with the shipbuilder guys and wannabes, mostly wannabes, over beer here at the Legion was one of his favorite ways of spending an afternoon. This right up to weeks before he passed. Joan was a part of our World Junior trips. 20 years ago today, Doc, Joan, and 10 others from town attended the gold medal game in North Dakota. This was not a one-game trip. We all flew to Winnipeg, rented vans, drove south to Grand Forks, and each of us with tickets for all 21 games in the tournament. He, Joan, and the gang followed that up with the 2009 junior tournament in Ottawa, and again with a much larger gang at the 2011 tournament in Buffalo. Don was a busy man. I mentioned the shipbuilder bull sessions, aptly named, mostly bull. At the Legion, he also was a part of a couple of weekly coffee clubs with up to 10 members each. Went to monthly Probus meetings, Friday blues hockey games with Lindy. And of course, you've heard that they stood at the railing, no seats for them. Those were honored spots at the railing. I recall one time being at a playoff game when someone from one of the other clubs tried to take those spots. It got ugly. And countless lunches and dinners with a wide variety of friends. He was also a founding member of our bi-weekly Scotch social group. This founded during COVID to bring a group of friends together to solve world issues and to have a taste of Macallan 12, single malt. Bob Hamilton, one of these guys, three more lines, wrote to the group, "Our world is sadder for the tragic passing of Don, the Doc. We're all richer for having known him as a friend. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for his Green Bay Packers."
Thank you. Terry, where are you? There you are, right there.
Yeah, I love your book.
First of all, Marco, I want to thank you and welcome you to the Packer Ownership Club. Doc Paul was a shareholder of the Green Bay Packers. And why the Green Bay Packers? Because Green Bay, if you've never been there, which is my shrine, is a town less than the size of the city of Barrie. It's a community-owned team. That's why Don Paul loved the Green Bay Packers. And Margot, you now are among a select group. Welcome. Doug, you can stick with the Raiders.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize.
Margot, Doug, Leslie, Cordy, Ann, grandkids, great-grandkids. It's my great honor today, don't want to pull a dunk, to celebrate a truly remarkable Collingwood citizen, Dr. Don Paul, or as he's affectionately known as Doc. And since I was a kid, you say Doc and you automatically say Paul. The basis of my talk today is what Doc stood for: service, dedication, and an unwavering commitment and love to the community of Collingwood, his home. You can take the kid out of South Porcupine, you cannot take South Porcupine out of the kid. Doc transferred his love of South Porcupine values to his home of Collingwood. He stood out as a citizen for over 60 years, waiting and watching Collingwood grow. As I look in this room, it is clear that Doc touched each of our lives in a profound and meaningful way. Coming to Collingwood, he had two mentor doctors, as Dougie said earlier, Dr. Robert Story and Dr. Don McKay. Both set the standard for community service in their lifetimes. It was a standard responsibility to commit to the community both professionally and personally to ensure the betterment of the overall community. All three went by the term Doc. Dr. Don Paul had an extreme love of athletics. Hockey, golf, hockey, slow pitch Christies, hockey, football, and hockey. Hockey was in the man's DNA. His first executive involvement, as Dump just said a second ago, was to be a founding member and then president of the legendary Collingwood Shipbuilders. Collingwood hockey was Friday night. The Builders played to many packed arenas. In those days, teams were community-owned, and it was the total responsibility of the executive to ensure the sustainability of the team. Doc's leadership and his uncanny ability to connect with people, you're all part of that, allowed him to do what had to be done as an executive chair. He connected with people from all walks of life, and that would serve him well then and throughout his life in town. When I was coming over today, I was thinking of Kipling, and Kipling's great saying, some can walk with kings and still have a common touch, and that's Dr. Don Paul. Peter Dunbar tells us he joined the Builders in 1983 and immediately met Doc as both a community and hospital leader. Doc fixed him up many times from his injuries and looked after him as best he could. He developed lifelong friendships with many of the players of those teams. Fern St. Ange, for example, in this room. As he settled into his new hometown, one of the most remarkable aspects of his character was his unwavering sense of duty. He served on numerous boards and committees over a period of well over 6 decades, often taking on leadership roles that demanded not just time but also heart and soul. He was the first to arrive and often the last to leave, not because he sought recognition, but because he believed in the mission and cared deeply about the people involved. Many of you here today, as I look around, served with him on those committees and boards. He taught us all that true leadership is not about titles or accolades. It's about serving others and lifting them up. I would like to recognize now some of the major impactful community projects that Don Paul took part in. And I went, and I could have asked many others in this room, but I found the people who were, I know, very instrumental in some of these projects. The Collingwood Shipbuilders, it's already been alluded to. The Sports Hall of Fame, something that Doc was extremely proud of. And I can tell you, if you come to a Blues game, Doc's in that lounge at every period bragging about the people on the wall. He's the best ambassador the Sports Hall of Fame has ever had. And I'm going to now rely on Kip Brown. I'm going to read out what Kip had to say. It was my pleasure and privilege to work alongside and often in the shadow of Doc Paul on numerous projects in Rotary, the Collingwood Shipbuilders, proposed multi-use facility, as well as the Collingwood Sports Hall of Fame and Arena Renovation Committee. He was truly a special man. When Doc's name was added, the credibility of any project was elevated, and his indispensable wisdom and diplomacy could be relied upon forever. He was a principled person whose integrity and work ethic set a standard for everyone involved. Accordingly, he was an integral part of furthering this Collingwood Sports Hall of Fame when it was in its infancy and blended into the Arena Renovation Committee which would establish a permanent place to house artifacts and preserve the legacy of inductees, while at the same time serving to produce income stream as we undertook to fund the Collingwood Shipbuilders hockey team. Doc had a heart for what Scotty Carmichael had begun in relation to the Hall of Fame. As can be expected, he and Eddie Bush were the key drivers of fundraising for the arena renovation. I love this. The only criteria for them to rest for you a donation was that if you had a pulse, they wanted your money. A friend emailed me from Mexico, Kip says, a couple of days after Doc's passing, instead of him, what a class act. I echo these sentiments and only add that all of Collingwood and her constituent lives that have been better and brighter lives through the influence of this wonderful man. I am attempting to digest very quickly 60 years of community service. The Blue Mountain Golf Club we talked about, the Sports Hall of Fame, probably one of Doc's greatest accomplishments, which never came to fruition, was the multi-use facility, where he and my good friend Ralph Snade chaired that committee, were able to wrest out of the provincial government the largest amount of money in the history of grant programming at that time, $8.3 million, to build an arena that consisted of a facility of 2 ice pads, 3 swimming pools, a library, a daycare center, and seniors walking circle. To his dying day, he got together with Ralph and the committee and had their monthly scotch to salute what they were had done. The hospital. What a word for Collingwood, right? I think one of my saddest moments in my life was the fact that we had the announcement of the hospital, and Dr. Paul and John DePoche, who generously gave the land, were not alive to see it. Dr. Paul lived for the hospital. He was the epitome of a hospital in Collingwood. Everybody knew when they saw Dr. Paul that he might need your support at the hospital. There was none better when it came to our hospital. And he had a very, very special relationship with an individual who, in my opinion, deserves an awful lot of credit for our announcement the other day, Jory Pritchard Kirk. Don Paul was a friend, an amazing mentor, and a role model who had strong values about right and wrong. He judged people on their actions, not on rumor or innuendo. Don was one of the biggest reasons for my 36-year career at the foundation. I knew him through my husband's hockey career before I started at the foundation, but he took me under his wing immediately. No matter how busy he was, his door was always open to listen, give advice, and help solve problems. We laughed together, cried once or twice, but I always came away from my time with him with a clear path forward. Even years after he left the hospital, I would seek out his advice over lunch or a scotch, for wine, for me, right, Don? Scotch for him. He was the standard against which I measured right and wrong. He taught me to see the good in people first. I missed the twinkle in his eye and his wonderful laugh. In any major project, there are visible and invisible processes. Doc Paul was heavily involved in the invisible process. I know as a former mayor and what I've been able to work with through the provincial government, what Don Paul has done for our hospital. It's something that only a few actually know and realize, but someday it will come forward, the role that the man has played. the World Special Olympics and special events. Wow. Peter Dunbar ran for 9 years. Collingwood became the capital of special events. He, along with Ralph Snade, Don Paul, Doug Clockins, the Band of Brothers, brought tremendous recognition to Collingwood. We had the World Special Olympics here, and I had to find someone to entertain and be the ambassador for Eunice Shriver. I'm of a generation who knows that Eunice Shriver is John F. Kennedy's sister. She started the Special Olympics. I went to Dr. Don Paul. Eunice Shriver couldn't quit talking about how great a man Dr. Don Paul was. What a salute. Peter Dunbar. Don guided me listening to my frustration as a municipal employee. Don became a good friend and then a great friend. He was always proud of South Porcupine. His first community project was the Sports Hall of Fame room. His knowledge of community was spectacular. He knew who to ask. Doc always encouraged me to seek challenges that would celebrate Collingwood's hospitality and volunteer capabilities. Many, many of you in this room are part of that. Doc was a control center to all my special events projects. He suggested who to do what, who would perform, and who would carry the water. Generous, compassionate, wise, committed to process, able to hear to both sides, but never ever, and if you knew Doc as I did, he's stubborn as hell at times. Never shy away from providing his opinion. Peter says, I am blessed to have spent time with Doc a few days prior to his passing. That was part of the Special Multi-Use Committee. And he was still a sparkly fellow looking for more challenging projects that should be undertaken. Don and his friends brought the world to Collingwood. We took great risks at times to ensure the job was done. And I can tell you, I can't believe how many days they would come in and ask for forgiveness and tell me who had a phone to make sure things didn't blow up. The only other guy who caused me that much concern was George Christie. Ralph Snade. Doc Paul was one of the top 10 people who I ever met and worked with in my life. He worked tirelessly on projects, did not suffer stupid, and said so with his always captivating smile. I hope I'm doing you proud, Doc. He was devoted to his team members and knew when they needed his support and encouragement to stay on track. This was a man who everyone he worked with would call a friend. I kept my class of tell him to him to our next meeting, Ralphie. The Popular Health and Wellness Village is a project that's finally working its way through municipal bureaucracy, and I want to salute the council members who are here today for the support around that. We hope to see shovels in the ground within the next year or so. Don Paul was an intimate part of that process. The invisible part. I would meet with Doc Paul every 2 weeks. Our agenda was quite simple. Family, hockey, the hospital, hockey, later Lindy, and hockey. As far as the village went, Doc worked very quietly with our engineering staff and with our architectural staff to determine what was going to go out there. His biggest concern was workforce housing and the fact that Collingwood people could no longer afford to live in our town. He was one of the strongest advocates for the 2,200 units of workforce housing. Strongest advocates for the fact that the better we can get clinics here that you don't have to travel downtown Toronto to be looked after. I can go on and tell you what he did behind the scenes. And he was the voice of Collingwood, a very strong voice, which I believe very firmly will be heard someday. Every time I think of the village, I think of him. The current Collingwood Blues. Marcus Lahey our young Blues captain, was someone he's very proud of. The Blues came back 5 years ago, and in that time we've been able to win 2 provincial and 1 national championship. Don and Lindy are an infant part of that team. Dougie spoke a minute ago, and Dunk, about Doc's spot in the arena. That's been his spot for 60 years. God help you if you took it. And they were not kidding when the people from Trenton thought that they could stand in his spot. They discovered very quickly that in an arena of about 1,600 fans that night, 1,400 were ready to take them on. That was Don Paul. Marcus Lahid. I only got to know Doc in the later years of his life, but he will be someone I will remember forever. Whether I was doing something work making, sure his yard was clean, or running into him around the rink, he would always brighten my day with his humor and his kindness. In every conversation we had, I could always count on him to deliver a witty joke. Doc made such a positive impact on me in the short time that I knew him. I will greatly miss seeing him in the spot, his spot, at our Blues games. He will always be a very special person to me. That's the transfer of an outstanding, remarkable man to a whole new young generation of young men who are academically driven in hockey. In closing, I would like to say that he was so quietly effective. He encouraged countless individuals to step outside of their comfort zone and embrace public service. His legacy is not just the countless hours he devoted to service, but as in my case, and others, for example, the seeds of inspiration he planted in us. In closing, let us honor him by carrying forward his legacy of kindness, compassion, and community engagement. Let each of us be the kind of citizen he believed we could be, active, engaged, and dedicating to making a difference. And what a difference he made. I had the honor of bestowing the Order of Collingwood upon him. My committee told me that they could not get over the number of support letters that went to his nomination. That speaks volumes as to the man. Thank you, family, for making the sacrifice of having the great man. If Mom were here, I'd say the same thing. And thank you, Lindy, for what you've done for him. What a positive difference Collingwood. Thank you, Doc.
Thanks very much, Terry. I now ask Dad's grandchildren, Katie and Lizzie, Gordon Ann's daughters, and Andrew and Jonathan, Leslie's and my sons, who would like to say a few words about their grand.
When I started gathering my thoughts about what to write for Grandpa today, I started to think of the ways I want my 2 kids to remember their grandparents. And my hope is that they remember the little things. The big trips and events are obviously important, but for me, I think the small moments that may not have seemed significant at the time are going to be the memories of Grandpa that I cherish the most. During pretty much every visit to their house when I was a kid, Grandpa would bring me up to his study to use the old gumball machine in his office. I'm not sure how often he refilled that thing because the majority of time they were completely rock hard and stale, but I don't think that ever stopped me from trying to eat 5 of them at a time. I was very lucky that my spot at Nana and Grandpa's dining table was right beside Grandpa. At every meal, he'd watch me thread my cutlery through the holes in Nana's nice lace tablecloth. I'd get a look from him, but he would never once tell me to stop. At dinner, I listened to him talk about his childhood, and I got a front row seat to hear the originator of the loud Paul laugh. I visited Bermuda with Nana and Grandpa twice while I was a teenager. I remember snorkeling with Grandpa at Tobacco Bay and riding on the back of his moped all day while he pointed out different beaches and places he thought I think were cool. I'll always think of Grandpa when I see a crossword puzzle, a squirrel climbing up a bird feeder, a black jube, and whenever I see a car towing a trailer that is definitely not roadworthy. I'll also always remember how his face would light up when he'd see my 2 kids. I loved him very much, and I'll miss him forever. There are many memories and moments I have with Grandpa, but what stands out to me is the type of person he was. He was intelligent, incredibly funny, and always there to support us in the big moments in our lives. He joined us going to Russia to watch our sister compete in the Olympics. He came into Ireland for my graduation, where we spent a week as a family in Killarney, and he traveled to England for my wedding. There was just something about him that drew people in, and he always made connections and friends on these trips. At my graduation, he found a family from Timmins, and they were immediately his best friends, sharing stories back and forth. And at my wedding, he quickly charmed all of my friends. He always made it very clear how proud he was of us, and I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to travel and spend these holidays with him. When we were younger, Grandpa would often tell us his tales from growing up in Northern Ontario. He thought it was important we knew how relatively easy our lives were, because apparently he had to walk to and from school uphill both ways in a snowstorm every day of the year. He'd also often tell me his stories about the hardships he experienced being the youngest of 3, and how this meant that we had a special connection. I love Grandpa, and I will always cherish my memories with him.
Growing up in Collingwood, there were many areas of town where Grandpa had left his mark, whether it be the curling club, town hall, the Eddie Bush, the golf course, or the hospital. I always loved being able to show my friends the impact that Grandpa had around on this community. I remember going to Collingwood Blues games with my friends in elementary school, and I was always eager to take my friends to the various places around the arena where his photo was up or his name was written. It was also a regular occurrence when I would meet my friends, especially their parents. Their first response would normally be a story about the famous dog Paul. As Lizzie and Katie alluded to, I was always focused on the very small moments we had with Grandpa, which were always super fun around their house. Getting into my teenage years, many of my conversations with Grandpa were centered around sports, as he would give me grief about the state of our local Toronto sports teams, as his Yankees, Packers, and Red Wings were at the height of their powers at the time. I specifically remember when I was around 12 and I was over at the house, and he was sitting in his infamous chair. I think we were watching some sort of a hockey game. I was sitting on the ground right beside him playing with the dog Max, and we talked for hours about the various popular sports superstars who he wasn't particularly fond of at the time. Whether it was Randy Moss being mean to his Packers, or literally any Red Sox player or Blue Jays player, he always had a fun sport take that we could discuss. As I got older, Grandpa began to ask me for different types of advice, and one he did ask me for was for some fashion advice. He was looking for a new pair of cool shorts, as he was looking for, and we walked down to Sporting Life, and I found him some beige Quicksilver cargo shorts. For the next 3 summers, he wore them exclusively, and he would always tell all of his friends about them, and that I picked them out for them. Unfortunately, he didn't come back to me for this sort of advice, but he regularly showed off his sporting gear, such as his Yankee shirts or his Packer jerseys, when I would come back and see him. So again, it was these very small moments that made our time with Grandpa very special.
There are obviously so many moments with Grandpa that I've been reflecting on and cherishing over this past month, and many of those seem to have a common theme of directly being impacted by being the youngest of the family and the youngest sibling. And as all youngest siblings know, the bullying and suffering that we endure from our older siblings, Grandpa always seemed to stick up for myself and Dad and Lizzie as the youngest, as he had the same experiences with his brothers as well. Well, he stuck up for me most of the time, but being the youngest in the entire family for almost my whole life, my rather energetic behavior as a child at family gatherings caused him to gift me the nickname Johnny Doughhead. I like to think that I grew out of that nickname after a while, and one way he always stuck up for me is that every spring and fall we would go over to his house and bring his lawn furniture in and out of storage. Even though that my dad and my uncle did it for basically their entire lives before Andrew and I began to help with it, over the last few years he convinced himself that I was the only one that could do it correctly because I was the youngest. And he always made sure to remind everybody in the family that I was the only one that could do it properly. I'm also the only grandchild in the family to have truly adopted the Green Bay Packers fandom, and I'll wear it proudly on my sleeve. He even gifted me his cheese head that he got from Lambeau Field, and just recently, Dad and Margot and Gord had gotten him a brand new Green Bay Packers sweater for Christmas, and he told them that he wanted me to have it, so I wear that proudly as well. I'll forevermore cheer on the back every Sunday for Grandpa. All these memories that we've shared with you today are evidence of the fact that Nana and Grandpa were such loving and caring grandparents to all of us. Through my entire life, I, as well as the rest of us, are always looked forward to Christmas and family events because it was one of the only times of the year that all of us would be together because we're all so spread out. And I could tell that being together was his favorite time too. We love you, Grandpa, and thank you for giving us the amazing family that we all cherish so much.
Okay, I'm going to finish up. First, a couple of different thoughts regarding our, just so I don't forget, regarding our camping trips. We went on many obligatory cross-Canada camping trips. Station wagon, towing the hardtop tent trailer. My dad cooked. He cooked on the Coleman stove. Some of you may have heard the term golden brown, best in town. Well, pancakes would arrive every morning, and we learned the term golden black, best in the shed. The other thing that we were talking about also the Sports Hall of Fame, he would tease me unmercifully at times because one of my hockey teams is in the Sports Hall of Fame. He would continuously remind me that our picture was right next to the toilet. Anyways, Dad. Margot, Doug, and I have had a wonderful life with our parents. They were supportive, loving, firm with their rules, but fair. We lived a close family life on Maple Street. Growing up, being known as Don and Joan Paul's child was certainly something special. And my admiration for my father and his accomplishments somehow internally helped me work especially hard in high school and university so that I could follow him in medicine. It was my honor to be able to work with him for many years as his partner in our radiology group. I loved it. He seemed okay with it, I think. I'd like to focus on the last few years. Ann and I had owned a house on Minnesota Street for a few years, and 2 years ago it became time to start renovating so we could move back to town. I always wanted to move back to this beautiful town to be with all of you. After a frankly pretty easy conversation with Ann, I asked my dad if he would be okay with us moving back in with him on Maple Street during the renovation. I kind of lied, telling him it would only be for a few months. Half joking rationale to my friends, I'm 61 years old. Who doesn't move back home with their parents when they're my age? I certainly got some strange looks from people, including my siblings, when we told them our plans. Some thought we'd lost our mind. Seriously though, I thought it would be a good time to spend a year with my dad late in his life, help with things, be there for him, and Anne was totally supportive of it. Dad's typical comment at the time, is Anne coming? Yes. Great, she can cook for us. It was much more than that for him, though. He loved being around Anne. They had such wonderful, easy rapport. The added benefit, not lost to me though, was that it was rent-free. As it turns out, moving in with him was the best gift he could have ever given Anne and me. Most of you know that our wonderful daughter Alex was killed 6 days later. That beautiful home that our mother made for our family was a perfect refuge for us to begin our grieving process. Dad was easy and non-confrontational. We came and went and spent time alone as we pleased. Margot and Doug were in most days. The support and love everyone gave us through this process was really, really hard to describe. Later, we were invited to go out to dinner with his Tuesday group a few times, and loved the never-ending stories from him and his friends. It was just coming back here and being here through this time was so amazing for us. The only argument I can remember we ever had was over me leaving the basement door open one day when Charlie was visiting. Dad was so concerned that Charlie might fall down the stairs. Charlie had already gone to bed. And that's the version of the story I'm sticking with. As Doug said earlier, and Terry alluded to, we were able to go to a hockey game. I think Lindy was away. The never-ending stream of people that stopped by to talk to us was amazing. And Marcus, I'm sorry, but I don't think I saw you play. I know you're out there. There's just too much action at the game. When Dad was in hospital after his stroke, Lindy, Margot, Doug, and I spent almost every one of his waking hours with him, taking turns and at times together, helping, talking, and in Lindy's case, bringing him her special love, along with her baked goods, the muffins, and of course some Macallan Scotch for his health. The evening before Dad's passing, we were able to bring him home. We set him up in his den in front of the TV. Dad, Margot, Lindy, and I had a delicious steak dinner with wine and Doug's homemade apple pie. We had a couple of drinks of scotch. We talked and reminisced. He teased us. We watched the Packers football game. It was wonderful. It was sad. It was beautiful. Yesterday, I was sitting at my table with my youngest grandson, Henry, and I looked down at my hands. To me, these are my father's hands. He gave me his watch, actually, before he died. As a child and a young man, I always loved it when people would comment on how much I looked like my dad. And more recently, as we moved back to town, and even tonight, or to this afternoon, when someone often says it, and I think, but he's 91. Maybe a younger, cooler version of my dad? But I know in my heart I'm younger, but I'm definitely not cooler. Now my wish is to grow old, hopefully to 91, and continue to look like him, but try to emulate a little bit of that special charisma he had. I've often spoken to my friends about what a simply amazing feeling it is to feel so proud of my children and who they've become. Same goes for how Margot, Doug, and I felt about our parents. We loved them, and we were extremely proud of them. It's been sad for us to see them go, but we were so lucky to have them raise us, be our mentors, and then become our friends. It truly has been a wonderful life with them. We will miss them. We will miss and remember our father and our mother with love always. Margot Douglas and I would like to thank you all for joining us here to celebrate our wonderful father's life. He wanted this event here at the Legion so all of his friends could be comfortable, enjoy their conversation and a few drinks. He would have loved being here with you. But hopefully, he's sitting in his chair somewhere right now watching a football game, probably silently, and having a scotch with one of his and your good old friends. Thank you.